Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
There is an eeriness when silence cannot be heard, when there is a buzzing around you, chatter, or energy that drowns out the warnings. For two young adventurers, this looked like a hike with their families, a day of exploring a pass, and venturing into crystalline ice caves that stood late into summer. Laughter echoed off the frozen walls, a trickle of water danced through the layers and masked the monster lurking above. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hi, welcome back. I am your host, Kayla, and first things first, I want to say welcome to a couple new Patreon subscribers, April and Kay. Thank you for joining. I'm glad to have you. Second, you will likely have already noticed at the very beginning of an episode, there's a new soundbite, and that is because I have joined the Darkcast Network, so there's just going to be that new soundbite at the very beginning before my intro, and then occasionally throwing in some promotional audios for some other shows that are within the network, and also some other shows that are doing some just really cool things. And there may be some other fun things coming down the line that I'm really excited about, and I think this is going to be a great venture. I'm really excited about it. And what else I'm excited about is the summer. And it seems that the weather has finally turned, at least here in the Midwest, and school is getting kind of close to being over, and summer adventures are gearing up. I've already booked areas for vacations this summer, and, we're setting out for a summer of adventure before school returns to us, much like Alec and Ollie were as their own summer was coming to a close on a comfortable summer day in 2008. Near Snoqualmie Pass, about 50 miles or 80 kilometers east of Seattle in the Cascade Mountain Range, there is a trail called Denny Creek Trail. This is a steep and popular trail as it leads to an area where ice caves last nearly all year round. This is due in part from the elevation of the pass in combination with the dense forest covering, preventing sun from making it down to the forest floor. The area is on the west side of the Cascade Mountains and is covered with glaciers, snow-peaked mountains. There's flowering meadows and old-growth forests and beauty that you seem to think that you can only read about in books. Inside of Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest in the state of Washington, the forest runs nearly 140 miles or 225 kilometers along the Cascade Range from the Canadian-United States border to the northern boundary of Mount Rainier National Park. This area gets a ton of precipitation every year, averaging 100 inches of rain and over 400 inches of snow. The Pacific Crest Trail crosses Snoqualmie Pass along with many other trails for hiking and climbing, and this is also a great area for winter sports like cross-country skiing or snowshoeing in the winter months. Inside this area, there are many deep ravines that just kind of are speckled around, and ice or snow caves have formed when the ravine is filled with snow and ice throughout the winter, and as summer melt flows through the bottom of the ravine, it hollows out snow and ice, creating a cave of sheer rock walls and a snow and ice roof. The caves in the Denny Creek Trail area in 2008 were about 10 to 20 feet deep, or 3 to 6 meters, depending on which one you found, and about 50 to 75 feet wide, or 15 to 22 meters in width. It is also highly recommended that you stay out of these caves, and this story is a perfect reminder as to why. On August 21st of 2008, 17-year-old Alec Corbett and 14-year-old Alessandro Jamili also nicknamed Ollie, with their mothers and sisters from Seattle while they were on a summer break before returning to Bishop Blanchett High School. There was also a youth group in the area that was exploring and just kind of getting the most that they could before they returned back to school schedules. And this youth group was being led by a woman named Marilyn Pike. One of the boys' mothers held up their camera to take a photo of the two boys as they were standing about 10 to 15 feet or 3 to 4.5 meters inside of one of the caves. The weather was overcast and cool for an August day, and there was a fine mist of rain coming down, similar to what you might expect to experience in the Pacific Northwest. At about 1 p.m., a sharp crack rang through the area, and a violent rumble followed, causing all heads to turn to see what was happening. The sound was deafening. Some stepped away from the noise before investigating, and some covered their heads worried about what was coming down. And as the area quieted again, there was immediate shock as those who looked into the cave saw a mass of icy rubble, and they began to process what happened. And then they realized that Alec and Ollie were not accounted for. Not only that, but this mound of thick ice was over where they had just been standing. Jumping into action, Marilyn and the youth group ran over and started to try to dig with hands and sticks, but as they did so, they found that they couldn't get the right leverage that they needed because they had to stand on the ice. And even while they themselves were trying to hold still, they were just sliding. Meanwhile, 911 was called, and the call was answered at 1:28 p.m. East Side Fire and Rescue, Bellevue Fire Department, Snoqualmie Pass Fire and Rescue, Seattle Mountain Rescue, King County Sheriff's Office, and King County Search and Rescue all responded to the location. One of these teams also had a search and rescue dog with them, though I will admit now that I don't know how much and to what extent the dog was involved. First, there was the Snoqualmie Pass Fire and Rescue, who set up a command post at the trailhead. 4 members of this crew then made their way up the 2 miles of trail, which included nearly 2,000 feet in elevation gain, which is a big incline, especially when you're needing to carry supplies. So these 4 initially set out and only carried the basics, as their job would be to essentially assess the situation and then report back to the command to figure out exactly what they were needing. Here they found that the ice was like a solid structure. The ice was 5 to 8 feet or 1.5 to 2.5 meters thick. Some were in small chunks, others were in huge slabs, and while some of the roof was made up of snow, this appeared to be mostly ice. At 3:03 p.m., Eastside, Bellevue, and Snoqualmie all set out to the cave carrying snow shovels, avalanche probes, and rope, along with some other gear, including a chainsaw. And then a little bit later, a second group was sent up with basket litters and a litter wheel to be able to carry any injured parties down. Together, these crew members tossed around ideas because they had hand tools that were just not getting through the ice fast enough to even have a chance at saving these boys, if they were even still alive. And each new bit of information gave them less and less hope that they were performing an actual rescue. They had axes and shovels, but they were just shaving away the ice instead of allowing chunks to be moved, and this was just really asking for disaster with how long it was taking.
Do you love true crime and travel? Having traveled the world solo the last couple of years and being obsessed with true crime, I found myself researching others who took the same vacations but never made it home. The Last Trip is a true crime podcast covering missing and murdered people that were living their best lives on vacation. I'm your host, Jamie Beebe, and each week I'll bring you on The Last Trip, taking a deep dive into vacation culture and travel spots, tips on staying alive while traveling, and ultimately recreating someone's last days in paradise. What led to their last trip? What are the hard facts? What is the final outcome? And could you be next? David Snedden was a 24-year-old college student from Utah attending Mandarin classes in Beijing when he mysteriously disappeared while hiking Tiger Leaping Gorge. Chinese authorities said he drowned in the gorge, and U.S. authorities agreed, although his body was never found and his parents didn't believe that. 7 years later, out of the blue, they got a phone call from a former U.S. official who had evidence David is still alive. This case sounds like a Hollywood movie, but evidence doesn't lie. So where is David Snedden? Famous rugby player and Celebrity X Factor contestant Levi Davis went missing in Barcelona last year while on a backpacking trip through Europe. Just days before he vanished, he posted a 15-minute video to his Instagram account saying his life was in danger and people were after him. After he disappeared, several theories emerged. But what really happened to Levi Davis? Join me, Jamie Beebe, co-host of the popular true crime series Strictly Stalking, as I embark on a brand new adventure combining true crime and travel. Listen to The Last Trip wherever you get your podcasts.
They were putting the boys whose conditions were unknown at risk. They were also putting every single rescuer who was here inside the cave at risk as well. Eventually, someone thought about the chainsaw that they had brought up, intending to use the chainsaw to cut down trees and trunks to use as stabilizers for the ice as they worked deeper. The idea quickly shifted from cutting trees to cutting ice, and this would be a winning ticket. Even though, generally, when it comes to rescue, power saws are just not used. The smallest mistake with a power saw can have devastating effects. But at this point, they saw no other way. The roof of the cave had collapsed in a donut shape, and so only the center part had actually fallen out and onto where the boys stood. The rest of the roof of ice and snow was still there. And as crews worked to access the boys, cracks in the ice, as they snapped larger, continued to reverberate through the caves as if calling out a warning to leave while you still can. The crews worked in 2 teams of 2. One would be digging with a saw and the other one would be acting as a spotter. Still, they worked meticulously, cutting a block of ice away 1 foot at a time. But it isn't just down. They would also have to be removing ice in a large enough of a surface area to be able to fit themselves as rescuers into the hole and also remove an injured party. So they were not just going deep, but also sawing wide as well. But even though the chainsaws were working, they struggled. As they tried to shift faster, the chainsaws would stall or run out of gas. And this was happening so often that they actually ended up calling for multiple chainsaws to be brought in, so that way when one stopped working, the crew would be able to pass a working one in, so there would be nonstop work. And then there were crews outside of the cave who were working on the chainsaws that were either out of gas and making sure that they were well oiled, or if one was stalling for some reason, figure out why it was stalling and get it back into working order. At 5:22, firefighter Terry Cushman was in the hole when he paused and yelled for the boys, as they had been doing this entire time, to try to figure out where they might have been and if they were conscious or even just alive. And as he did so, he expected to hear the same silence as they had been getting. But then, a murmur. Everyone quieted to listen more carefully, and their apprehension turned to glee when they realized the voice they heard was one of the boys yelling back to them. Now was the time to switch back to hand tools. If they were close enough to hear them, then they were too close to be using chainsaws. And finally, after just over 5 hours, one of the boys was found. Ollie was finally freed at 6:33 p.m., and he was placed into a rescue basket, and then much like a bucket brigade where one person is holding a bucket and they pass it to a person next to them and that person passes it essentially down the line, they did this with the rescue basket that was holding Ollie. They passed it down a line of rescuers until he was free from the cave of ice. Ollie was first to be reached after rescuers had dug down nearly 7 feet to be able to access him. Then it was Alec's turn, who was actually deeper than Ollie despite standing right next to him in the photo. But 40 minutes later, Alec would be pulled free from the icy wreckage alive. Alec and Ollie were again beneath 7 to 8 feet or 2.1 to 2.4 meters of ice and compressed snow. They got lucky with where they were standing near some rocks, and it created a little bit of a support system because as one giant slab of ice came down, it hit those rocks and then prevented them from being crushed completely. Instead, they were pancaked under the ice, but still unable to move. 8 minutes after the boys were freed and rescuers grabbed their gear and left the cave, the rest of the roof collapsed in. But even though they had seemingly dodged a bullet here, they still had to get the boys to a hospital. They had 2 options. One was to carry them down this rugged and steep trail to the trailhead where an ambulance would be able to pick them up. This was less than ideal because it would be really difficult for the crew and the boys, but with the rain, they just weren't sure that a helicopter would be able to be dispatched to them. They also had waited until the boys were free from the ice cave to even consider if a helicopter would be a viable option because they were worried that if a helicopter showed up while rescuers were still in the cave, the vibration of the rotation from the propellers would cause more of the cave to collapse in on top of rescuers. And clearly, the secondary collapse was a very real concern. But they were in luck. The rain was easing and the skies were starting to clear, so a Navy Black Hawk helicopter flew in and picked up the boys at 7:33 p.m. They were flown to Harborview Medical Center, where they were first treated for hypothermia. Both boys had broken their backs. Alec had broken a single ankle, and Ollie was a little bit in worse condition as he had broken both ankles, dislocated a shoulder, had some cuts and minor fractures to his head and face, but otherwise they were in good spirits. Beneath the ice, Alec and Ollie were in pain and freezing cold and slightly panicked from being trapped in an area where they couldn't move. Trying to stay calm, they held each other's hands and talked about sports and the school year they would be starting, one as a senior and one as a freshman. And despite these really hopeful and ambitious ideas that they would be able to play sports when they started school that year, their estimated recovery time was 6 months to a full year. This story of Alec and Ollie is a reminder of the unpredictable power of nature and also how fragile we are as humans. But within that darkness, 2 bright lights shone through: the remarkable resilience of these 2 young boys and the unwavering courage of the countless individuals who risked their own safety to bring them home. I cannot imagine the fear that must have gripped Alex and Ollie trapped in the cold and unforgiving ice, and especially as someone who is a bit claustrophobic, the idea of just not being able to move and not knowing how much earth is on top of you and if they're going to get you out in time would be terrifying. And it's truly inspiring how well they handled the situation for as long as they did. They found strength in holding on to hope to support each other and to fight for their survival against these unimaginable odds. Their spirit in the face of such terror is, again, inspiring. And then there are the rescuers, the cavers, the paramedics, the firefighters, the volunteers who all descended into this area driven by an unshakable commitment to save these 2 lives. They navigated treacherous conditions, worked tirelessly around the clock, and brought their expertise and determination to a seemingly impossible task. Their selfless actions embody the very best of human spirit, and that's all that we can ask for in every single one of our rescuers and search and rescue people who are stepping out into the unknown and doing their best to have a positive outcome. The successful rescue of Alec and Ollie wasn't just a triumph of skill and logistics, it was a testament to the bravery found in both the vulnerable and the valiant. It's a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of circumstances, hope can endure, and the courage to help others can illuminate the way forward. Thank you for listening. If you have a moment, be sure to leave a review, and we will talk next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.